For 8 months, I walked into church every Sunday knowing that almost everyone in that sanctuary thought I had stolen from God. My name is Denise Ferro. No one said it that bluntly to my face at first. That would have required courage. Instead, people lowered their voices when I came near. Women who used to save me a seat suddenly remembered they were waiting for someone else. Men on the finance board stopped greeting me with the easy warmth they had shown for years. Friends I had prayed with, cooked with, cried with, and celebrated birthdays with began treating me like I had something dirty on my hands. And the worst part was that I knew exactly where the story had come from. Our assistant pastor, Rhett Mallory, had convinced the senior pastor, the board, and eventually most of the congregation that I had been stealing from the weekly collection fund. He did not make some vague accusation. He came armed with numbers. He said there were repeated shortfalls during the months I had counted alone, while my usual co-counter, Marlene, was recovering from surgery. He said the missing amounts added up to nearly $8,000. He spoke with that calm, wounded, pastoral concern that made people feel as if he was reluctant to accuse me but morally obligated to protect the church. By the time anyone asked me directly, I had already been tried in the court of whispers. I had served as volunteer treasurer at New Covenant Fellowship for 6 years. It was not glamorous work. Most Sundays, after the service ended and people drifted toward coffee and pastries, I went into the small office behind the fellowship hall with another volunteer and counted the collection. We filled out the count sheet, separated cash from checks, signed the paperwork, placed everything in a sealed deposit bag, and made sure the deposit was taken to the bank according to the church's procedures. I took that job seriously because I understood what those funds meant. Our church was not rich. We were not the kind of congregation with a giant campus, a professional accounting department, or a staff full of people handling every detail. The weekly collection paid the electric bill, kept the roof patched, funded the food pantry, helped single mothers with emergency groceries, and supported the little outreach programs that made our church feel useful beyond Sunday mornings. I was 51 years old then, a divorced woman with 2 grown daughters, a quiet job as an office administrator for a medical supply company, and a life that had settled into routine. Church was one of the anchors of that routine. I had been part of New Covenant for more than a decade. People there knew my daughters when they were teenagers. They knew when my marriage ended. They knew when my mother died. They had sat with me through some of the hardest years of my life. So when Rhett's accusation spread, it did not just threaten a volunteer role. It threatened the one place where I still believed my character had been seen clearly. Rhett had come to our church about 4 years earlier. He was younger than our senior pastor, polished in a way that made people listen, with a neat beard, sharp suits, and a voice that could soften at exactly the right moment. He had a talent for sounding sincere even when he was saying very little. He remembered people's names, prayed beautifully in public, and often spoke about integrity, stewardship, and the danger of hidden sin. Looking back, that last part feels almost theatrical. At the time, people admired him for it. I worked with him often because he helped oversee several administrative areas, including some designated giving accounts. The weekly general collection was handled by me and another counter, then reviewed by the board treasurer, but certain restricted funds, like building maintenance donations, were tracked separately through Rhett's office because he coordinated repairs and facility needs. I never loved that arrangement. It meant one person had too much visibility over a separate account without enough shared oversight. But churches run on trust more than policy sometimes, and Rhett was trusted. Marlene, my regular co-counter, went on medical leave after knee replacement surgery. She was supposed to be out 6 weeks, but complications stretched it to almost 3 months. During that period, the church should have assigned another counter every week. Sometimes they did, sometimes they did not. On the weeks no one was available, I counted with Rhett present for part of the process, or I counted alone and had him sign as the staff witness after I sealed the bag. I was not thrilled about it, but I did what needed to be done. Every week, I completed the count sheet. Every week, the deposit went to the bank. Every week, I kept copies in the treasurer's folder. I thought the paper trail protected everyone. 8 months before the truth came out, Pastor Ellis called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked if I could come by the church before Sunday. His tone was careful. Too careful. I remember standing in my kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear, a pot of soup simmering on the stove, and feeling my stomach tighten before he even told me why. He said, "Denise, there are some concerns we need to discuss. It would be better in person." I asked, "Concerns about what?" There was a pause. Then he said, "About some financial discrepancies." That was the first moment I knew something was wrong. Not because I had done anything, but because innocent people recognized danger too. sometimes faster than guilty people do. When I arrived at the church the next evening, Pastor Ellis was waiting with 3 board members in the conference room. Rhett was not there. That struck me as strange because the concerns apparently involved the collections, and Rhett had been the one helping during Marlene's absence. But his absence made sense once they began talking. He had already given his performance. This meeting was for them to watch mine. Pastor Ellis folded his hands on the table and said, "Denise, Rhett brought something to our attention that we need to handle carefully." I looked around the table. No one held my eyes for long. One of the board members, Glenn, slid a paper toward me. It was not an official bank statement. It was a typed summary, apparently prepared by Rhett, listing dates and supposed shortfalls from several weekly deposits. The amounts varied. 400 here, 900 there, 1,200 another week. The total at the bottom was just under $8,000. For a few seconds, I could not speak. The numbers looked so specific that I understood immediately why people had believed him. A vague accusation can be dismissed. A spreadsheet feels like proof to people who do not ask where the numbers came from. Pastor Ellis said, "We are not accusing you outright. But these weeks correspond to the period when Marlene was out and you had more independent control of the count." I felt heat rise up my neck. I said, "You may not be accusing me outright, but someone is." Glenn cleared his throat. Rhett said he noticed the pattern while reviewing internal deposit expectations. He felt obligated to tell us. "Internal deposit expectations?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" No one answered clearly. I picked up the paper and looked at the dates. I remembered some of those Sundays. One had been the week after a storm damaged part of the fellowship hall roof. One had included several large checks from families who gave monthly instead of weekly. One had been a communion Sunday. I remembered filling out those count sheets. I remembered sealing those bags. My first instinct was to explode. I wanted to slap the paper back onto the table and ask how dare they. I wanted to ask why they would believe Rhett over me when I had handled church funds faithfully for 6 years. I wanted to demand that they drag him into the room and make him say it to my face. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way they were watching me. Maybe it was the knowledge that an angry woman is often treated as a guilty woman, especially in a church meeting where everyone pretends calmness is the same as righteousness. So I folded the paper and placed it back on the table. Then I said, as evenly as I could, "I have never taken $1 from this church. Not one. If Rhett is claiming these deposits were short, then we need the actual bank records. Not his summary, not someone's expectations. The bank deposit records. Compare them to my signed count sheets for every week on that list. That will tell you whether money was missing." One of the board members, Lydia, looked uncomfortable. "We intend to review everything," I said, "then start with the bank. If the deposit slips and bank records match the count sheets, there were no shortfalls." Pastor Ellis nodded slowly. "That is reasonable." I almost laughed. Reasonable. As if asking for the actual records before treating me like a thief was some generous concession. Before I left, I asked one question. "Who else knows about this?" The silence told me enough. Pastor Ellis said, "We have tried to keep it limited." I said, "That is not an answer." He looked pained. "Some board members. A few ministry leaders may be aware that there are concerns." A few ministry leaders. In a church our size, that meant half the congregation would know by Sunday. I drove home that night gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I sat in my driveway for almost 20 minutes before going inside. Then I called my older daughter, Talia, and told her what had happened. She was furious in the way adult daughters get when they see their mother being mistreated. "Mom, you need a lawyer," she said immediately. I said, "I have not even seen the records yet." "Exactly. They are letting a man ruin your name without records. Call a lawyer." I did not want to. Part of me still believed this could be handled within the church. Part of me thought, surely, once the bank records arrived, everyone would apologize and we would move forward. But another part of me, the part that had sat across from those board members and seen doubt in their faces, understood that reputation is not restored automatically just because truth eventually appears. The following Sunday was the first service after that meeting. I almost stayed home. I stood in front of my closet that morning, staring at dresses I had worn to church for years, and felt like each one belonged to a woman who no longer existed. In the end, I went. I chose a navy dress, simple earrings, and the same black flats I always wore when I had treasurer duties. I told myself I had done nothing wrong, and hiding would only make people think Rhett had been right. Walking through those front doors was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Conversations dipped when I entered, not stopped. That would have been too obvious. They just softened. People glanced over and away. A woman named Cheryl, who used to hug me every Sunday, gave me a quick smile from across the lobby and suddenly became very interested in the bulletin table. During worship, I stood in my usual pew and sang while my throat felt tight. I could feel people looking at me. I knew some were curious, some sympathetic, some already convinced. Rhett sat on the platform beside Pastor Ellis, hands folded, face composed. When he prayed over the offering, he said, "Lord, make us faithful stewards of what belongs to you, and expose anything hidden that would harm this body." I nearly walked out. Instead, I sat down and stared at the back of the pew in front of me until the prayer ended. After service, I went to coffee hour because leaving immediately felt like surrender. That was when I saw the first unmistakable sign of what Rhett had done. My friend Elaine, who had been close to me for over 10 years, avoided eye contact entirely. We had shared holidays. She had come to my mother's funeral. She knew my daughters, but that morning, when I approached the coffee table, she picked up her cup and moved to the other side of the room as if I had not seen her. I went home and cried in my kitchen, not delicate tears, ugly, angry, humiliated tears. On Monday, I called an attorney named Priscilla Nakamura. Her office was in town, and she had represented someone I knew in an employment defamation matter. I expected her to tell me to wait, that church disputes were messy, that I needed patience. Instead, after listening carefully, she asked precise questions. Was the accusation communicated to people beyond the board? I said, no one has admitted that directly, but people clearly know. Do you have a copy of the written summary? No. They showed it to me, but did not let me keep it. Do you have your count sheets? The originals are in the church records. I have some scanned copies from monthly reports, but not every week. And you believe the bank deposits matched your sheets? I know they did. She paused, then said, then the most important thing is to secure independent documentation before the narrative hardens further. The bank records matter. The count sheets matter. And if this man knowingly made false statements that damaged your reputation, we will discuss your options once we know exactly what the records show. Hearing her say false statements steadied me. It named what was happening. Priscilla advised me to formally request that the board preserve all financial records, emails, meeting notes, and documents related to Rhett's accusation. She drafted a letter for me. It was polite but firm. It stated that I denied the accusation completely, requested the underlying records, and expected all relevant documents to be preserved. When Pastor Ellis received it, he sounded hurt on the phone. "Denise, was an attorney necessary?" I said, "Pastor, was letting the accusation spread before checking the bank records necessary?" He had no answer. The bank records did not arrive quickly. That was another kind of torture. The church's bank required formal authorization, and because some records were archived in a way that required additional processing, the board kept saying they were waiting. Week after week passed. Each Sunday, I sat in the same pew and felt my old life at church recede a little farther. People changed around me in ways that were small enough to deny, but obvious enough to wound. A children's ministry volunteer stopped asking me to help prepare snacks. A prayer group I had attended for years forgot to include me on a text chain. Someone else was asked to assist with benevolence distributions, a task I had handled before because I knew the records so well. No one said, "We do not trust you." They simply acted as if trust had quietly expired. Rhett, meanwhile, became almost painfully gracious in public. That was part of what made it so maddening. He did not avoid me, he greeted me with solemn kindness. One Sunday, he approached me near the hallway outside the sanctuary and said, "Denise, I want you to know I'm praying for truth and healing." I looked him directly in the eye. "Then pray for the bank records to arrive," I said. For a split second, something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, maybe. Fear, maybe. Then the gentle assistant pastor mask returned. "Of course," he said. That moment stayed with me. Priscilla did not want me relying solely on the board's internal review. She said, "A board that has already been influenced by a confident accusation may unconsciously interpret ambiguous information in favor of what they already believe. If the records vindicate you, you want an independent professional who can say so clearly." She recommended a forensic accountant named Cornelius Akhib. Cornelius was not flashy. He was a soft-spoken man in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, careful manners, and the calmest way of asking devastating questions I had ever heard. When I met him in Priscilla's office, he listened to the timeline and took notes on a yellow legal pad. He asked, "Who prepared the allegation summary?" I said, "Rhett." "Was it based on bank records?" "No one has shown me anything proving that." "Who had custody of the count sheets?" "The church office. Usually me, the co-counter, and sometimes the board treasurer accessed them." "Who had access to the accounts outside the general collection?" I hesitated. "Rhett managed some designated funds, especially building maintenance donations." Cornelius looked up then. Independently? Mostly. The board reviewed summaries, but he coordinated the spending and tracking. He wrote something down. At the time, I thought he was just being thorough. The loneliness of those weeks is hard to explain to someone who has never been quietly suspected by a whole community. It was not like being openly attacked, where at least you can defend yourself in the moment. It was more like living under a fog. You could not grab it, could not argue with it, could not force people to admit what they were thinking. You just watched their behavior change and tried not to become bitter. My younger daughter, Simone, wanted me to stop attending until the records came in. "Why keep putting yourself through that?" she asked. I told her. "Because it is still my church, too." But some Sundays, I was not sure I believed that. One morning, I found myself sitting in the parking lot 10 minutes after service had started, unable to make my hands open the car door. I could hear the music faintly through the building walls. I wanted to drive away and never come back. Then I thought about what that would look like. Denise Ferro, absent, ashamed, guilty. That was the story Rhett wanted. So I got out of the car. When the bank records finally arrived, the board notified Priscilla, and she insisted that copies be provided to Cornelius for independent review. There was some resistance at first. Glenn said the board could review its own documents. Priscilla responded that because my reputation had been damaged by allegations already circulating beyond the board, an outside review was appropriate. The board relented. Cornelius spent days with the records. Count sheets, deposit slips, bank statements, copies of checks, internal summaries, board reports. I wanted him to call me after the first hour and say, "You were right." Instead, he worked methodically, refusing to rush. When he finally called, his voice was steady. "Miss Ferro, the general collection deposits during the question period match your count sheets. Every week listed in Mr. Mallory's summary reconciles. I found no missing funds from the weekly collection during those dates." I sat down on the edge of my bed. I had known it. I had known it for months. But hearing a professional say, it still made my whole body go weak. I whispered, "Every week?" "Every week," he said. "The shortfalls described in the allegation summary do not exist in the bank records." I closed my eyes. For the first time in 8 months, I breathed fully. Then Cornelius said, "There is something else." The way he said it made me open my eyes. He explained that while reconciling the general collection account, he had also reviewed transfers and designated giving records to understand how Rhett might have created his false shortfall summary. That led him to the Building Maintenance Fund. The fund received designated donations from members who gave specifically for repairs, roof work, plumbing, paint, HVAC service, and other facility needs. Rhett had managed that fund more independently than the general collection. Cornelius found irregularities there, not vague irregularities. Real ones. Checks written to vendors that did not match invoices. Cash withdrawals categorized as emergency maintenance purchases with no receipts. Transfers that were approved in summaries but did not correspond to completed work. Duplicate expense descriptions. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, spread over roughly 2 years. The total was worse than I expected, more than the supposed amount Rhett had accused me of stealing. And the timing mattered. Cornelius discovered that Rhett's accusation against me had started shortly before the annual audit, which was scheduled to include a closer review of designated accounts that year, because the Building Maintenance Fund had grown after a special giving campaign. If no distraction had occurred, the Maintenance Fund would likely have been scrutinized within weeks. Instead, Rhett created a crisis around the General Collection Fund and pointed everyone at me. I remember sitting in Priscilla's office while Cornelius walked us through his findings. He had charts, copies, reconciliations, and a timeline. It was all so orderly that it made the betrayal feel even uglier. This had not been a misunderstanding. It had not been Rhett noticing an error and jumping to the wrong conclusion. He had fabricated numbers from thin air, attached them to weeks when I was vulnerable, because Marlene was absent, and used his credibility as assistant pastor to redirect suspicion away from himself. Priscilla looked at me across the table and said, "Denise, this changes everything." I said, "He knew." She nodded. Based on this timeline, it appears he knew exactly what he was doing. We scheduled a meeting with Pastor Ellis and the board. This time, I did not go alone. Priscilla and Cornelius came with me. The mood in the conference room was different from the first meeting. The board members looked uneasy before anyone said a word. Rhett was not invited initially because Priscilla wanted the findings presented to the board first. Pastor Ellis began with a prayer, but his voice trembled slightly. Cornelius did not perform outrage. He simply handed out packets and explained the records. He began with the weekly collection accusations. For each date listed in Mr. Mallory's allegation summary, I compared the signed count sheet, deposit slip, and bank record. The amounts match. There is no discrepancy. The alleged shortfalls are not supported by the underlying records. Lydia covered her mouth with her hand. Glenn flipped through the packet as if hoping another page would save him. Pastor Ellis looked at me, and I saw the moment the full weight of what they had done reached him. Cornelius continued. During the course of my review, I examined the building maintenance fund because it is referenced in internal transfers, and because Mr. Mallory appears to have had direct administrative control over that designated account. I found multiple unsupported disbursements, duplicate expense entries, and withdrawals categorized as maintenance expenses without corresponding invoices. The pattern spans approximately 2 years. The timing of the allegations against Ms. Ferro coincides with the scheduled annual audit that would have brought additional attention to this account. The room went silent. Priscilla then said, "My client has spent 8 months under suspicion because of accusations that were not verified against basic bank records. Those accusations were false. The evidence also indicates that the person who made them may have been diverting funds from a separate church account." No one rushed to defend Rhett then. Pastor Ellis asked for a break. He looked pale. I wanted to feel triumphant. I thought vindication would arrive like a clean bell ringing. Instead, I felt exhausted. The truth was finally in the room, but it had taken 8 months to get there, and those months could not be returned to me. After the break, the board asked Rhett to join the meeting. He entered with his usual composed expression, but he stopped when he saw Priscilla and Cornelius at the table. His eyes went to the packets in front of everyone. For the first time since this started, Rhett looked uncertain. Pastor Ellis said, "Rhett, we have reviewed the bank records and an independent forensic analysis. The collection shortfalls you reported do not exist." Rhett blinked. "There may have been an error in how I calculated." Cornelius slid 1 page across the table. "The numbers in your summary do not reconcile to any bank record, count sheet, or deposit slip I reviewed. Please identify the source documents used to generate them." Rhett stared at the page. Glenn said, sharper than I had ever heard him, "Where did the numbers come from?" Rhett said, "I would need to review my notes." Priscilla said, "You have had 8 months to support the accusation." Pastor Ellis then turned to the maintenance fund. His voice changed. It lost its pastoral softness. "Rhett, Cornelius also found unsupported withdrawals and false expense entries from the building maintenance account. We need you to explain them." Rhett tried. At first he said some receipts must have been misplaced. Then he said vendors were sometimes paid in cash. Then he said emergency repairs had been handled informally. Cornelius answered each explanation with documents. The vendors had no record of some payments. The repairs had not occurred. The same invoice description had been used twice. Cash withdrawals lined up with no church expense at all. The room tightened around him. Finally, Lydia said, "Did you take the money?" Rhett's face changed. It sagged, almost like the mask had become too heavy. He said, very quietly, "I borrowed some funds. I intended to replace them." I felt my hands go cold. Pastor Ellis said, "How much?" Rhett did not answer. Cornelius did. He gave the documented amount from his analysis and explained that further review might identify more. Rhett began talking then, not with real confession at first, but with excuses, personal debts, medical bills, credit cards, pressure at home, the language of desperation, arranged carefully to invite pity. He said it had started small. He said he always planned to pay it back. He said he panicked when he learned the audit would look at the maintenance fund more closely. Then came the sentence, "I will never forget." I thought if attention shifted to the weekly collections, the audit would focus there first. Pastor Ellis closed his eyes. I said, "So you chose me." Rhett looked at me then, not like a pastor, not like a friend, like a man caught standing beside the damage he caused. He said, "You were the only one counting during some of those weeks." It made sense. It made sense. Those 3 words were almost worse than the theft. I said, "I sat in this church for 8 months while people looked at me like I robbed them. You watched that happen. You prayed about hidden sin from the platform while you knew it was yours." Rhett lowered his head. I did not accept that as remorse. Shame is not the same as repentance. Sometimes shame only means the mirror has finally been turned around. The board removed Rhett from all financial responsibilities immediately. By the end of that week, he was suspended from his position. Shortly afterward, the church referred the matter to local law enforcement because the evidence showed theft from designated church funds, not merely poor record-keeping. The board also notified the congregation that there would be a special meeting after Sunday service. That Sunday, the sanctuary was packed. People knew something serious had happened. I sat near the front with Priscilla beside me, though she was not there to speak unless needed. Rhett was not on the platform. That absence alone sent a ripple through the room. Pastor Ellis stood at the pulpit looking older than he had 8 months earlier. He began by saying the church had failed to handle a serious allegation with the care and verification it required. Then he said my name. The accusations made against Denise Ferro regarding the weekly collection fund were false. Independent review has confirmed that the deposits matched the count sheets and that no collection funds were missing during the weeks in question. A sound moved through the congregation. Not a gasp exactly, more like the room realizing it had been holding its breath. Pastor Ellis continued. He explained, carefully and without unnecessary detail, that evidence had been found indicating Rhett Mallory had diverted money from the building maintenance fund, and that the matter had been referred to law enforcement. He said Rhett had admitted to fabricating the accusation against me to shift attention away from his own conduct. Then Pastor Ellis turned toward me. Denise, on behalf of this board, I am sorry. We should have required documentation before allowing suspicion to spread. We should have protected your reputation while the facts were reviewed. We did not. I nodded, but I could not speak. Then he read a written apology from Rhett. It had been prepared as part of the legal process Priscilla had begun, and it was painful to hear. Rhett admitted that his accusations were false, that he had no bank records supporting them, that he had knowingly allowed others to believe I had stolen church funds, and that his statements had caused serious harm to my reputation. I watched the faces around me as the apology was read. Some people cried. Some stared down at their laps. Elaine, my old friend, wiped her eyes with a tissue and would not look up. After the meeting, people approached me one by one. Some apologies were sincere. Cheryl hugged me and said, I should have asked you. I am so sorry. Glenn, the board member who had slid Rhett's summary across the table months earlier, stood in front of me with tears in his eyes and said, We failed you. I failed you. Elaine waited until most people had left. She looked devastated. Denise, she said, I don't even know how to say how ashamed I am. I believed him because he sounded so sure, and I pulled away from you when you needed friends. I wanted to tell her it was fine. That was the polite church instinct. Smooth it over. Make the other person feel better. But I had learned something during those 8 months. Quick forgiveness can become another way people avoid facing what they did. So I said, It hurt me badly, Elaine. I need you to understand that. She nodded and cried harder. I do, she said. I am sorry. I accepted the apology, but I did not pretend everything was restored in that moment. Priscilla helped me pursue a defamation claim against Rhett personally. Some people in the church were uncomfortable with that. They thought because the truth had come out, legal action was unnecessary. A few even hinted that Christians should not sue one another. Priscilla was very direct when I told her that. He did not merely insult you, she said. He knowingly made false statements accusing you of a crime, allowed them to spread through your community, and did so to conceal his own misconduct. Accountability is not bitterness. I needed to hear that. Rhett ultimately settled rather than contest the claim in court. The settlement included monetary damages for the reputational harm he caused, as well as the public written apology that Pastor Ellis read before the congregation. I will not pretend the money erased anything. It did not give me back those Sundays. It did not undo the way people looked at me. But it mattered that the harm was formally recognized. It mattered that he could not simply resign, move away, and leave me with nothing but whispered sympathy. The criminal process moved separately. I was not in charge of that, and I did not need to be. The church provided records to law enforcement, and Cornelius's analysis became part of the documentation. The board also expanded the review of other accounts to make sure there were no additional problems. Cornelius told me after his work closed that what Rhett had done was cruel, but not as rare as people might hope. We were sitting in Priscilla's conference room after the final report had been delivered. He removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and said, A person stealing from an organization sometimes creates a competing crisis before discovery. If they can make someone else look suspicious, especially someone with temporary access or a procedural weakness around them, attention shifts. People follow the accusation instead of the records. I said, he counted on people believing him. Cornelius nodded. He counted on his authority, and he counted on no one asking for original documents quickly enough. The bank records were the turning point. They usually are. Paper does not care who sounds sincere. That sentence stayed with me. Paper does not care who sounds sincere. Our church changed after that. It had to. The board implemented stronger oversight for every account, not just the general collection. No one counts alone now. No staff member controls a designated fund without independent review. Bank statements go directly to multiple board members. Monthly reconciliations are reviewed by people who did not handle the money. Count sheets are scanned and stored securely. Restricted funds have clear approval trails. The annual audit is no longer treated like an inconvenience. Those changes should have existed before my life was turned upside down. Still, I am glad they exist now. People sometimes ask why I stayed at New Covenant. The honest answer is complicated. I did not stay because everything was fixed. It was not. I did not stay because every apology healed the wound. It did not. I stayed because leaving would have meant Rhett took my church from me completely, and I was not willing to give him that. I also stayed because some people did the harder work after the truth came out. Not everyone, but enough. Pastor Ellis met with me privately more than once and listened without defending himself. The board accepted outside recommendations. Several members rebuilt trust slowly, through action rather than words. And I stayed because I still believed in the good the church could do when it stopped confusing trust with lack of oversight. I continue to serve as treasurer, though the role is different now. I do not carry it quietly on my own shoulders. I insist on procedure. I insist on signatures. I insist on records. If someone says we all trust each other, I say good, then good records should not offend anyone. Some people laugh when I say that. I do not. My relationship with the congregation is better now, but it is not the same as before. Maybe it never will be. There is a kind of innocence you lose when you see how quickly people who know you can be persuaded by a confident lie. Before all this, I thought years of service built a wall around a person's reputation. Now I know that a trusted voice with a detailed accusation can knock holes through that wall in a matter of days. But I also learned that truth needs more than patience. It needs records. It needs witnesses. It needs people willing to ask uncomfortable questions before they join the whispering. Sometimes I think about that first meeting, when Rhett's typed summary was pushed across the table. I think about how different everything could have been if one person had said, "Before we discuss Denise, show us the bank records." One sentence might have spared me months of humiliation. One demand for evidence might have exposed Rhett before his lie grew roots. That is the part I still wrestle with. Not that Rhett lied. Liars exist. Thieves exist. People who wrap selfishness in spiritual language exist. What hurt most was how many people accepted the lie because it came from someone they trusted and because the numbers looked official. If there is anything I want people to take from my story, it is this. Do not confuse confidence with truth. Do not confuse a title with integrity. And never let an accusation destroy someone's name before the actual paper trail has been checked. Because for 8 months, I was not fighting missing money. I was fighting a story. A story built by a man who needed a scapegoat and knew exactly how to make one. The bank records cleared my name. Cornelius's review exposed the real theft. Priscilla made sure Rhett could not walk away without answering for what he had done. And my congregation had to face the uncomfortable truth that they had nearly helped an actual thief ruin an innocent woman. I still sit in that same sanctuary most Sundays. I still hear the offering plates pass down the rows. I still bow my head when Pastor Ellis prays over the gifts. But now, when I hear words like stewardship and integrity, I think not only about honesty, but about verification. Faith does not require blindness. Community does not require silence. Trust is strongest when it is willing to be documented. So tell me, if you had been in my position, would you have kept attending church while everyone suspected you, or would you have walked away until the truth came out? And if you were one of the people who believed the accusation too quickly, what would it take for you to make that right? Share your thoughts, because stories like this happen anywhere people rely on reputation more than evidence. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe for more real stories about betrayal, accountability, family, faith, and the truth finally coming to light. Take care, and I hope you never forget to ask for the records before you believe the rumor.